Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Arbury Road podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about Brexit, and I'm joined by two very special guest journalists. First of all, we've got Anna Hart, an Arbury Road favourite, who's based here in Valencia, like us. How are you doing, Anna?
Hi, I'm doing well, thank you. Are you?
Good. All good. We're also joined by James Felton, who's based in Swansea in Wales. James, how are you doing?
Yeah, very good, thanks. Hope
Fantastic.
you're well too.
So, without further ado, let's get down to it. So, James, we'll start with you. We must be 6 weeks into the post-Brexit world now. How are you feeling about it? Has your opinions changed? What were your opinions to begin with? And how do you see the situation at the moment?
Yes, it's a bit difficult at the moment. It's obviously in the middle of a pandemic. It's not everyone's. It's not necessarily the main thing on the news. Obviously, vaccines and COVID are the two main issues, and it feels a bit like Brexit's gone under the radar. I know it's a bit different. It's like the small things which have like affected us over the last month or two. So over Christmas, half my family are Spanish. We normally get our grandmother delivers Spanish food over to us for like Christmas because we spend it here. And this year she couldn't because of COVID, and it was very difficult to get there. So we hired a company, food from a Spanish company based in the UK, who did all that for us, and it did reach us. But as soon as January came, they said no, we can't do any more deliveries because of Brexit. And also, for example, when I go to Spain, say I want to watch UK TV, that's not allowed anymore either because of Brexit. So a lot of the things at the moment are like the day-to-day things of not being allowed to do things that you would normally be so used to doing,
Mhm.
if you know what I mean.
In terms of the those food deliveries, what's the reasoning that they've given behind not doing them anymore? Is it just purely because the charges are so high?
I think it's the charges. Yeah, they cited Brexit because it's not only charges. I think it takes a lot longer. There's delays between getting stuff between countries and extra charges. Um, I don't think it's as economically viable. Obviously, in the middle of a pandemic, it's harder. Plus, when at Dover and other places, there were a lot of blockages over the last month or two, and that doesn't help either. And with the flight ban and with other things, it's obviously a very difficult position for businesses like those.
Yeah, absolutely. So Anna, same question to you then. How's your day-to-day life been affected? Because obviously, as a British citizen based in Spain, you're probably feeling the impact firsthand, no?
Yeah, definitely. So, well, I've always been for Remain, of course, but I think even more so now, just seeing the mess that's been produced because of Brexit. I mean, even only in the first month. Um, so for me personally, I have always wanted to move to Spain and live in Europe, and it's been made a lot harder due to Brexit. So the whole residency process is a lot more complicated. There's a lot more bureaucracy and obstacles to overcome. So I came to Spain in September. First of all, it was an Erasmus Plus internship scheme. So like I benefited from the UK's membership of the EU, even though we were in the transition period. The Erasmus Plus scheme was still ongoing, and it is until at least the end of this year now because of COVID. They've extended it. Um, so I was lucky that I got to take part in that before Brexit occurred. But yeah, now the process of applying for the residency was quite rushed. So I came here before the deadline of the 31st of December, but I had to make sure all my documents and paperwork, etc., were all in order by the end of the year. So it was a bit stressful to get all that sorted because it's not really a simple process. There's so many different forms and stages that you have to go through. And I think for anyone who is looking to come to Europe to live, work, or study, the whole process is definitely a lot more complicated now. I think it's going to put a lot of people off, which is such a shame because there's so many benefits to living in another country, learning about different cultures, learning different languages, meeting people from all over the world, and just the opportunities you get. I think, yeah, it's such a shame that that's going to be a lot more difficult for UK citizens, especially for younger people as well. So.
Yeah, it's a massive shame, definitely, that we all have to, you guys in particular, have to go through this whole rigmarole. Have you noticed any different treatment, Anna, in Spain now, from people or even professionally or this kind of stuff?
Not so much in terms of personal relations. Like, I haven't noticed.
Mhm.
I don't really feel like I'm being treated differently because I'm from the UK. Maybe that's just the people I know. I'm lucky. Like, I'm mostly with progressive-minded friends, so I don't think that's really an issue for me. But in terms of professional, it is quite an issue because trying to find work that I can do that's allows me to stay in Spain is quite an issue because, especially because of Brexit. I think it was a little bit easier before, um, so I think that's really the main issue. And especially with COVID now, a lot of work is becoming remote. So, for example, like remote jobs where you have to be based in the UK, um, I think is going to be more common now because of Brexit. Um, Whereas I think one of the opportunities of like the digital space and opportunities to work online is that you could be able to travel whilst working. So I'm not really sure how this is going to develop in the next few years. I think um, it'll be good if more companies would be open to providing like flexible and remote work that can overcome national borders. But yeah, I think again Brexit is an obstacle to that because of all of the legal taxes, etc.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it sounds counterintuitive. Remote work is remote work. There shouldn't be an issue doing it in Valencia or in Britain or in China. It shouldn't matter, you know.
Exactly.
All right, James, then what's the general feeling in the UK at the moment, since you're based there? And in particular, I'd like to hear how people in Wales are feeling about Brexit, because as in Ireland at least, and in Europe, we hear a lot about Scotland as its own entity, but Wales always seems to just get lumped in with England. So what's the feeling in Wales about this whole situation?
Yeah, so in the UK, I saw a poll. I think it was yesterday, a YouGov poll, which had, I think it was, the question was, do you think it was the correct decision to leave or remain? And it was the first time that the saying correct decision to leave was 45%, which is the highest it's been since the vote. And people were saying that was partly due to all the vaccine rows and stuff that have happened over the last month or two. I don't think it was necessarily about a trade deal or about specific Brexit related issues. Um, so a lot of people now, I think a lot of people have said they're just not fed up, but because it's been going on for a long time, we've had two different prime ministers, loads of different arguments over trade deals and stuff. A lot of people just wanted it done. Um, but I think, oh, because we're in the pandemic, it is slightly different. But over the next 2 to 5 years, it people will see like the full effects of it. Because at the moment, even if say a business loses economic um, economic support, people can just say, "Oh, that's because of COVID," not necessarily because of Brexit. So until COVID is over, you can't really understand the full extent of any or whatever damage it creates. And in Wales, I think, yeah, we've always lumped with England, and it's true that I think 51% of people voted to leave in Wales in the original referendum. But last year, Oxford University did a study that said, I think there was 80,000 English people who lived in Wales, and had their votes been Remain, then Remain would have won in Wales. And I'm not so much sure about Remain, but in terms of Welsh independence, there does seem to be more and more of support for that, especially with the pandemic, where we had our own decisions to make about lockdowns and about, just like Scotland and Northern Ireland have. And there are elections in May, local elections, and it'd be interesting to see whether the two independent, well, Plaid Cymru and another independence party gain from this. There's been criticism of Labour because um, they've handled some things differently to England, but that's to be expected because we had our own decisions to make. And in terms of Brexit, I don't, Wales has received a lot of funding from being one of the poorest areas in the UK. We received a lot of grants, and if that money, they did say the money would still come to Wales. So if that money is still there, then I don't think people will complain as much. But if suddenly all those grants are not there, then and Wales becomes even poorer, I think that will definitely affect people's views on the EU,
Yeah, absolutely.
especially if Scotland and Northern Ireland leave or decide to join the EU. Or it's obviously very difficult, but I think Wales is it's not talked about as much, and it is definitely separate from England in a lot of things. Just like a lot of England is separate from London or from um, the different regions.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I'd like to come back to Scotland and Northern Ireland in a minute, but I'd love to hear a bit more about the push for Welsh independence. Is this a more recent phenomenon, or has this been bubbling for decades now?
Yeah, so I mean, Plaid Cymru, the Welsh National Party, is in, I think it was the 70s, they got their first, I could be wrong, but they got their first MP. But they've only had like two or three, and it's always been in the North Wales Welsh speaking part of the country. But especially now, especially with social media and young people, there seems to be a bigger push for independence. We've seen with COVID that we can have a say in our own affairs, and I think that this is definitely increasing. I think Brexit in 2016 definitely played a part in this, because a lot of people were frustrated. And like, I went to a few of the Brexit marches in London, and you saw a lot of like Welsh flags, and that's not to say that all Welsh independent supporters necessarily want to rejoin the EU, or that might not be the main reason for it, but it's definitely a part of it.
Mhm. Perfect. All right, staying with these ideas of independence, Anna. Do you anticipate Scotland going for a big push now to have another referendum for independence, given that it's pretty clear that the majority of Scottish people are not in favour of Brexit? They weren't in 2016, and they seem to still not be in favour. Do you think we'll see another referendum soon?
Yeah, I think it's inevitable, honestly, because I mean, if I was Scottish, I would want to be independent now and join the EU as an independent nation. And especially because, as Nicola Sturgeon always says, we were taken out of the EU against our will. I think that's a really powerful message, and a lot of Scottish people resonate with that. I mean, obviously, I can't speak on behalf of Scotland, but just from my perspective, I would definitely be frustrated right now. I mean, I'm from Manchester, so we're quite close to Scotland, I guess. We're still in the north, but as in politically, we're more left leaning, kind of Labour centric, and I think a lot of my friends and people around me kind of agree with a lot of the SNP's policies and Nicola Sturgeon's kind of line on things, especially on the EU as well. I mean, that's obviously because that with young people it is very different, but I think a lot of my friends who are English would still think that Scotland will leave, and would kind of support that, as we would, kind of understand Scottish people in that situation right now. Looks like a much more beneficial outcome for them than to be, ruled by Westminster, the government they didn't elect. It's quite opposed to their own government with the SNP. So yeah, I think there will be.
It's coming. Yeah. I mean, I hope so. I'm a bit biased here as being Irish and everything, but I'd always be in favour of everyone getting independence if they want independence, whether it be Wales, Scotland, whether the Northern Ireland want to have a vote on a united Ireland, whatever it may be.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, can I just
Absolutely.
add something? Because I mentioned about Manchester, I think there's a sort of a similar feeling of like being ruled by a government that we didn't vote for, which is similar to how Scottish people feel, I imagine. The thing of being ruled from Westminster. So I think even though I think most UK, I don't know, there's sort of like an attachment to the United Kingdom. People don't really want to see like Scotland or Wales leaving, but I think people understand though the kind of feeling behind it of you want to well, I guess this is actually underlining the whole Brexit thing of, take back control, but in a different way. So kind of ironic, I guess, the whole take back control of your own policies, laws, etc. But I think you can do that, but also be within like a connected international European environment. So I think it's very different, the kind of Scottish view of this and the Leavers view.
Yeah, well, it's extremely, as you say, it's extremely hypocritical of the powers that be in Westminster. Oh, we're going to take back control of the country, and then we're going to decide how things affect the people of Wales and the people of Scotland, even if they didn't vote for it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's complete hypocrisy. What about Northern Ireland then? So James, do you have any insight in Northern Ireland? Because this is a very tricky one. I mean, we're really exposed, we're highly exposed to the need for there to be no border between the North and the Republic. When we grow up in Ireland, the peace process was so important. But it's a bit of a mess now. What do you think will happen there?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I saw yesterday. So Kate Hoey, who was certainly the most prominent Labour MP who wanted to back Brexit, and she kept saying during the referendum, "Oh, nothing will change with Northern Ireland. Nothing will happen." And yesterday she tweeted saying, "Oh, it's an outrage that Northern Ireland is having problems at the border with the trade and with exports and tariffs and stuff." And it's like, well, that's what you were. You were the one who told us to vote for it in 2016. So you need to take responsibility. And when Theresa May was Prime Minister, and now in Boris, Northern Ireland's always been one of the main, if not the biggest issue, really, in terms of the border. And I don't know how it's going to go, to be honest. It's very complicated, and obviously the Good Friday Agreement was 1998. So like my generation, I was a year and a half when it happened. So I don't know anything other than it being relatively peaceful, and whether or not Brexit is going to change that. Not so much Brexit, it's just the way it's being handled as well. Because if we stayed in, for example, the single market straight away, that would have been completely different to all this dithering and people saying, "Oh, we'll just do an electronic border at the start," or making plans that were just not feasible, which people said at the time as well. One of the things I don't understand is when Boris Johnson uses it a lot, he calls like Keir Starmer Captain Hindsight, saying, no one would have guessed it at the time, but a month ago he was saying these things, so he did guess it. There's just doesn't seem to be an appreciation sometimes of how complex these issues are.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've touched on something that I think is really important, and I hope that this is what happens over the coming years, is that many of the politicians who pushed for Brexit now are so clearly going back on what they said and contradicting things they said, their party said. And I really hope it creates an air of accountability and opens people's eyes to the fact that a lot of politicians will just say whatever they have to say at that moment to get the votes,
I mean, even with the single market, I saw there's a video on YouTube which has like Michael Gove, Nigel Farage, Daniel Hannan, all the prominent ones saying, we're either going to get a Norway deal, or we're definitely no one's going to sort of change our position in the single market, or and then suddenly, oh no, we voted to have all these trade deals with countries around the world, which apparently were going to be so easy to make from day one. And just like the other day, we had a trade deal with a country, I can't remember which country it was, and they were saying how much, but it was like 0.5% of the total trade we had with the EU whilst in the EU, which we could still make trade deals with other countries outside the EU, as Germany and other countries do anyway. So that's some of the frustrating parts of it, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of looking at the EU then, and I'll come to you with this, do you think Brexit has kick-started a pattern? Do you think other member states are going to be looking closely at what happens in Britain over the coming years with the view of potentially leaving the EU themselves?
Yeah, well, I think this is obviously what the EU is so keen to avoid, which is another reason why the negotiations have been so complex and long-lasting. Because the EU can't be seen to be giving the UK a favourable deal that would then lead other countries to want to take the same path. But on the other hand, the UK want to prove that this was a good decision, and yeah, I think though, if you look, most people looking at the UK right now are thinking like, what a mess have you made? Like, why have you made this decision? Yeah, the whole thing with the vaccines was sort of, I feel like some kind of, it was a bit of propaganda sort of to kind of portray Brexit as a good thing, that we could only acquire these vaccines because we've left the EU. But I mean, that's not true. And
the vaccines are like, I mean, okay, fair. If the vaccine rollout is going as well as the numbers are saying, you have to say fair play, well done. But it's kind of like pissing on a fire that you started to try and put it out. It's the absolute minimum success that they could have hoped for.
Yeah, and I'm sure like the UK could still have been really successful and efficient in vaccine procurement and distribution within the EU. So that argument just doesn't really stand. I don't think. I think other countries will be watching closely to see how things progress in the UK and whether they would want to follow the same path. But I really don't think at the moment that it looks very appealing to most Europeans to follow the same path that we are right now. That's my personal opinion, though. I mean,
I think you're right. To be honest, I share that opinion. All right. So last question, pretty straightforward one. I think I'll come to you first, James. Do you hope to see the UK rejoining the EU in the future?
Yes, but I'm not sure how we would do it. I mean, one of the main arguments for Remain at the time, and in terms of trying to get as good a trade deal or Brexit deal as we wanted, is that before Brexit, the UK didn't have the euro, wasn't part of Schengen, had all these different opt-outs. And if we were to rejoin in 10, 15, 20 years, I don't know if the UK would have had all these different things. Plus, in 10 to 15 years, I don't know what the makeup of the UK is going to be like. So whether it would be different countries, Scotland, Wales, well, maybe not Wales in the short term, Northern Ireland wanted to rejoin, but then countries like Spain might veto because of Catalonia and stuff. So it's a bit complex, which is why I think, there was a lot of complaints saying all the sort of pro-Remainers or anti-Brexit people all they were trying to do was delay Brexit, but they were, trying to get as good a deal as possible. And so many were saying, if it turns out well, or if, we're a good country, we're not going to complain. We don't want it to fail because because everyone thinks we're anti-British. But I think it's just really complex, really, because they've had 4.5 years of all these different agreements, which will obviously take time to rejoin. I think if Boris loses the next election, it would be more likely that we'd join certain EU things or agreements, or like the Erasmus scheme again, or the Medicine Agency, or have closer relationship with the single market. And with stuff like, for example, Biden being elected in January and the Paris Agreement being more important, hopefully, I think we might see more collaboration, even if it's not the UK within the European Union as an entity, I guess.
Okay. Final word, Anna.
yeah,
What do you think? Hoping to see you rejoin?
I definitely hope we rejoin, and I think it is possible. I agree with James, though it is quite complicated, and maybe there'd be sort of trickle effect, as he was describing, of joining small things again. But I think possibly in the next generation, I think because overwhelmingly young people wanted to remain, I think there is a possibility that we could rejoin. A more progressive and integrated Europe, possibly in the future. I think the UK will always have its own sort of opt-outs, and thing with Schengen and the euro. I think I don't see the UK joining those, but joining the EU as we were before, I think it is possible.
Yeah, hopefully. All right, Anna Hart, James Felton, thanks a million for joining me. It was a pleasure as always.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks a million, guys.